When you hear the Federalist Papers, you probably think dusty old documents, right? But what if I told you they were actually one of the most incredible, high-stakes sales pitches of all time? We're not talking about selling a product here. We're talking about selling an entire country on a brand new future. So let's get right into it.
So put yourself in their shoes for a second. How do you convince an entire country to throw out its government and try something, well, completely radical and new? That's the huge challenge Alexander Hamilton and James Madison were up against. The Articles of Confederation, they just weren't working. The country was basically falling apart. So they had to persuade a really, really skeptical public to take a huge gamble on this powerful, untested constitution. And in the papers we're looking at today, numbers 31 through 40, they go straight for the jugular, tackling the biggest, toughest criticisms out there. All right, first things first. Let's talk about the one thing that always gets people fired up: money. Specifically, taxes. Alexander Hamilton knew this was the biggest hurdle. I mean, without the power to tax, this new government would be just as weak and useless as the last one. His job? To convince a whole bunch of people who just fought a war over taxes that, giving this new government the power to tax them wasn't going to lead to tyranny all over again. So here's Hamilton's opening move in Federalist 31. He says, look, this isn't just my opinion. This is basic logic. It's as fundamental as saying 2 + 2 = 4. His big idea is that any government's power has to be big enough to handle its responsibilities. The power has to match the job. It's a really simple, powerful premise, and it becomes the bedrock of his entire argument. And he just builds his case from there, brick by logical brick. It goes something like this. Step 1, the government has to have the tools it needs to do its job. Okay, makes sense. Step 2, what's its biggest job? National defense. And, you can't predict when war might happen or how much it'll cost. Those needs are basically limitless. Step 3, how do you pay for defense? Revenue, money. Step 4, well, you see where this is going, right? If the need for defense is unlimited, then the power to raise money for it also has to be unlimited. It's a pretty slick, airtight argument when you lay it out like that. And he really hammers this point home. He basically says, think about it. What are the biggest expenses a government ever has? It's not building roads or paying clerks. No, it's wars and rebellions. The day-to-day costs for a state? Pretty small, pretty predictable. But the cost of national security? Whoa, that's a whole different ballgame. It's huge, and you just never know what's coming. And that's why, he argues, the federal government has to have the big financial guns. Okay, wait a minute. An unlimited power to tax? I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty scary. And Hamilton knew it sounded scary. That's why, right after he builds this case for a powerful federal government, he immediately pivots. He's like, okay, I know what you're thinking, but let me show you the guardrails. Let me show you how this whole thing doesn't just go completely off the rails. And this really gets to the heart of what the opposition, the anti-federalists, were so afraid of. Their nightmare scenario was this giant new federal government acting like a vacuum cleaner, just sucking up all the money in the country and leaving the states completely broke and powerless. Hamilton's response to this is, honestly, it's brilliant. It's a little technical, but it's brilliant. His big answer, which he lays out in Federalist 32, is this idea called concurrent jurisdiction. Sounds complicated, right? But it's actually pretty simple. Concurrent just means happening at the same time. So think of it like this. It's not one person's bank account, it's a joint account. Both the federal government and the state governments can make withdrawals, or in this case, collect taxes, from the very same sources. And to make it super clear, Hamilton points out that the only tax power the federal government has all to itself is taxing imports and exports. That's it. Everything else, taxes on land, on goods, you name it, that's all part of the shared pool. This was a huge deal because it meant the states would still have plenty of power to raise their own money. They wouldn't have to go begging to the federal government for cash. But the critics had a comeback. They'd say, aha, what about the supremacy clause? The part that says federal law is the supreme law of the land. They argued this was basically a trump card. The federal government could just declare any state tax null and void whenever it felt like it. And this is where Hamilton pulls off a really slick move. He tells everyone to read the fine print. See those words right there? Made in pursuance thereof? He argues that's the most important part of the whole sentence. Federal law is only supreme if it's actually following the rules of the Constitution. So a federal law that tries to just wipe out a legitimate state tax, that wouldn't be supreme law. That would be an illegal power grab. He completely flips the script. The supremacy clause isn't a blank check for federal power. It's actually a leash on it.
So, with Hamilton having laid out his case on the money side of things, the conversation gets broader. And now it's time to tag in the other heavy hitter, James Madison. He's often called the father of the Constitution, and now he steps up to the plate to defend the whole grand plan from, well, a whole storm of other attacks.
Yeah, if Hamilton was the numbers guy, the financial genius, Madison was the deep thinker, the master architect of the system. And in Federalist 37, his first move is to basically say, hey, everybody, can we just take a deep breath for a second? He wants to remind people that what they accomplished at the Constitutional Convention wasn't just hard, it was next to impossible.
And just look at what they were up against. I mean, there were no maps for this. They were completely in uncharted territory. They had to create a government with enough energy to actually work, but not so much that it crushed people's liberty. They had to draw a line between federal and state power, a line nobody could agree on. They had to do all this using just words, which can be fuzzy and imperfect. And on top of all that, you had the big states and the small states fighting for their own interests. Madison's point is pretty clear. Expecting a perfect document to come out of that process is just totally unrealistic. So, in the next paper, Federalist 38, Madison rolls out this absolutely brilliant analogy to shut down the critics. He says, imagine America is a patient, and not just sick, like on their deathbed. The best doctors in the land, the members of the convention, all got together, they consulted, and they all agreed on one cure that could save the patient's life. And that cure is the Constitution. But just as the patient is about to take the medicine, a bunch of random people rush into the room. They start screaming, "Don't take it, that's not a cure, it's poison. It'll kill you for sure." So Madison, speaking to the patient, America, just calmly asks, okay, before you listen to these guys, shouldn't you at least ask them what their plan is? Do they even have an alternative cure that they all agree on? And boom, that was the knockout punch. Because when you looked at the critics, they were a total mess. They couldn't agree on anything. Some were yelling that the new government was way too powerful. Others were yelling that it wasn't nearly powerful enough. The only thing they all agreed on was, we don't like this one. Madison's argument was just devastatingly simple. Who are you going to trust? The unified group of experts who came up with a concrete plan, or this chaotic mob of critics who can't even agree with each other? Next, Madison dives into maybe the deepest, most philosophical question of all. What is this thing they created? What do you even call this new government? Seriously, this was the million-dollar question at the time. See, the critics were arguing that the Constitution created a national government. And to them, national was a dirty word. It meant all power was centralized and the states would basically be wiped out. They said the convention was only supposed to tweak the federal system, a loose alliance of independent states. Madison's response in Federalist 39 is just, it's a work of art, a total masterclass in how government works. Instead of giving a simple yes or no, he does something way smarter. He breaks the Constitution down and looks at it from different angles. He asks, okay, how is it ratified? Well, that's done state by state, so that's a federal feature. But what about the House of Representatives? That's based on population, the people directly, so that's a national feature. The Senate? Each state gets two, so that's federal. The amendment process? It's a mix of both. What he reveals is that it's not one or the other, it's this incredibly complex hybrid. So the big reveal is, it's both. It's a brilliant mix, a composition of federal and national ideas. And Madison argues that this isn't some sloppy mistake. It's not flaw. It was done on purpose. It was the whole point, to create a brand new kind of government that took the best parts of both systems. Finally, in Federalist 40, Madison takes on one last big charge, that the convention went too far, that they broke the rules. And his defense is just so simple and powerful. He basically says, look, we were just a committee. We don't have any real power. All we did was write down some ideas on a piece of paper. He argues that the Constitution itself is just a recommendation. It has zero power until and unless the people, in their states, vote to approve it. The country was in a crisis, he says, and a crisis calls for bold ideas. But in the end, the people are the real judges. And this final quote just sums up the whole mindset perfectly. It's like Madison is saying, listen, don't get bogged down in technicalities about who had permission to do what. The only thing that really matters is the advice itself. Is it good advice? Is this the plan our country needs to survive? It's a powerful, pragmatic appeal to common sense. Well, in the end, the sales pitch worked. The Constitution was ratified. But here's the crazy part.
That fundamental tension they were wrestling with, that blurry line between federal power and state power, are we not still fighting over that exact same line today? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? After more than 200 years, some debates, it seems, just never end.